Hey folks, if you're a fan of Metroidvanias and looking for something different, well, today I'll be talking about Muro Studios' recently released Doomblade, which has some distinctive quirks to how it plays. But was it gleefully grim, or a dull and dreary time? I'm your host Arlian, let's find out together. In the depths of the earth, a gloomling ekes out an existence. She is the last of her tribe, a vestige left over from the horrific exploitation and devastation enacted by the tyrannical dreadlords, a trio of mysterious figures who rule over the now blighted world with vicious cunning and an iron fist. But the gloomling is not alone. From the depths of the caverns, a faint whispering is heard that leads her to a sealed sword, a sentient and ever so vengeful relic, the Doomblade. Ultimately, it's a pretty straightforward premise, but it's one that I enjoyed quite a bit, in large part because of the quality of the writing. There's just some morbidly hilarious moments you can stumble across as you play the game, such as the various dread monoliths you encounter, which are inscribed with, helpful, tyrannical edicts. Quite frankly, I adored these enough to hunt all of them down for the humor and the lore, even if there wasn't mechanical benefits for doing so. The NPC dialogue is also a treat, as the individuals you encounter tend to be a bit odd, in the sense that a number of them have adjusted a bit too well to the whole being ground under the heel of an oppressive regime thing. Or the mushroom people, like, oh my god, if there is a small arc to follow, it's everything involving them. It's just such a trip to see how that culminates. That said, there were a few things that stuck out to me on the narrative front as a nitpick. One, there are a number of story-related monoliths tied to the Gloomlings, which you aren't initially able to read, which wouldn't be that big of a deal to go back and find were it not for the fact that they don't actually show up on the map, even after you've discovered them, nor is there any way to place markers on the map to highlight them for later, or anything else of note for that matter. Which is then further compounded by the fact that every ending past the first, including the hidden optional epilogue, is gated behind hidden collectibles you can find, which might be a bit of a headache for completionists, given that you'll get locked out of earlier endings if you qualify for the more involved ones. I will say, having put in the time to see everything, I didn't regret the extra effort needed to see those endings, but I am glad I got the earlier ones. The gameplay certainly does play a large part in that decision though, if only because Doomblade is an interesting beast. See, despite having controller support, I can't recommend the mouse and keyboard enough because of the way combat plays out. The titular weapon has a rather distinct property, since it empowers the Gloomling to bodily fling herself at any enemy that you click on. Given that the combat situations can get a bit crowded, especially once you factor in projectiles, and you can likely see why it would be beneficial to be able to rapid fire click your way through a horde, especially given that you can actually change your trajectory mid-flight and sharply veer in a different direction at the click of a button. It's honestly a lot of fun in execution and has the added bonus of really helping to reduce travel time between areas as you fling yourself from one enemy to the next, an element that also factors into a number of the game's platforming puzzles. What's more, I found myself legitimately surprised at how challenging the game managed to get, even with this seemingly simple approach to combat. It's not long before you'll start to encounter battlefields replete with obstacles or bosses who are only vulnerable for brief slices of time, and otherwise require you to make clever use of your mobility to survive. Maybe it's just something as simple as only being vulnerable from a certain direction. Whatever the case, these elements all help to make the boss fights feel like a lot of fun, especially as I slowly acquired more abilities and found them being put to the test. Speaking of which, I absolutely loved the different powers I acquired over the course of the game because they really help to keep the experience feeling unique. For instance, one of them allows you to throw onions around, which can bloom into flowers when they hit fertile garden surfaces. Flowers which you can then target with your sword, allowing for all sorts of creative platforming solutions. Another power simply lets you ignore solid matter when you're targeting something, which yeah, is pretty awesome for that whole moving through areas quickly thing, and made even more so when you realize that if you preemptively dash before you reach the endpoint of your slash, you can cancel out of it and wind up in areas that would otherwise be inaccessible. And Doomblade is very good about pacing out the acquisition of these abilities, which means you'll constantly have new abilities to look forward to as you progress the game. Admittedly, the overall difficulty does become significantly steeper as you progress forward, with enemies growing tankier, and the only real way to empower yourself is through the hidden runes of ruin. That said, if you do engage with exploration, you can at least get enough to make one, which keeps things at a fairly doable level. And if you get both, it trivializes a lot of what you'll encounter. Somewhat, anyways, given that the Gloomling is fairly fragile and requires a fair degree of exploration to find the heart pieces needed to change that. Which, yeah, the state of the map does complicate that matter to some degree, so you can expect to do a lot of backtracking if your short-term memory isn't the best. That said, Doomblade is fairly kind insofar as its distribution of save points, and there is a fairly robust series of fast travel squids you can hop between. It really helped with that whole snagging all the collectibles needed to get the proper ending thing. But yeah, that was everything I had to gab about game mechanics, so let's get into the graphics. And on the whole, I really love the game's presentation. It has substance and style with a sort of bleakly adorable aesthetic to everything. That said, it pales compared to the music. Just hot damn, there are some absolutely fun tracks in this game that really brought some of the set pieces to life, or made an already solid boss fight especially memorable. If I did spoilers, you'd be seeing a moment from the last boss because it sticks with you for how great it is. So yeah, if it's not readily apparent by now, I really like Doomblade. It's just safe to say I love it. While it isn't the most complex game narratively speaking, there's still a lot to enjoy there, especially if you have the patience to hunt down every nugget of lore around. And on a mechanical front, I was absolutely astounded by how much they could do with the concept of click something to fling yourself at it. While I can nitpick elements like the map, that's ultimately because I was so invested in trying to see everything the game had to offer and tackle every challenge I could find. Quite frankly, I highly recommend this game, to the point that I would call it a solid hit, something I could recommend to fans of Metroidvanias or otherwise, since it provides something pretty unique, even if it is a bit tricky. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you have something to say, leave a comment. If you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews and interviews, hit subscribe and the bell. There's also a link to my Discord, the Crit Hit Cauldron, down in the description, along with my Patreon if you want to see reviews early or just support the channel, and some swag if you check out the merch house. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.